TJ Writes here. Welcome to part 3 of my 3-part series designed to get your story started or moving again, even if or especially if you have crippling writer's block. Part 3 focuses on all the tools and mechanisms we will need to put all the advice that we have learned in parts 1 and 2 into effect. Because I've been telling you things like, well, just go ahead and write, brainstorm, etc., etc. How do you do that? You're probably thinking all this advice is well and good, but I don't actually know how to sit down and come up with an idea. That is where our tools and research comes into play, because these activities might seem easy to some people and very difficult to others. Some people have more inborn talent than others, and some people have to really work hard at it. But the good thing is, if you have dedication and a willingness to learn, you can take your writing skills from 0 to 100. Remember, you can always follow along with this video in article form by clicking the link in the description down below, so check that out if you would prefer to read everything that I'm talking about. It's quite helpful to think of this section like baking cookies. Sure, you could go to the local mill and pick up some grain, you could go to the store and buy some salt, you could go to the farm and get some eggs from the chicken, and you could take all these raw ingredients and grind them down and mix them up and eventually come up with cookies. Or you could go to the store, buy a mix everything up together, and then you're going to have your cookies. Writing's kind of like that. You can start with the raw ingredients and come up with everything yourself, or you can use the research and analysis that many great writers have done before and use that to help you so that you're not starting entirely from scratch. After all, why reinvent the wheel? You are going to be putting your own unique spin on everything that you're learning. Just like with cookies, when you get a box mix from the store, it might call for chocolate chips and you put in raisins instead. So too with our writing tools, there might be a particular structure that says do this at this specific point, and you say, you know what, I'm actually going to do this other thing instead. In this section, Narrative Tools, I'm going to be focusing on some common elements that you will find in many different stories that you can use to start pulling all of your story ideas together. I talked in depth about obstacles in part 2, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention one right here, which is Murphy's Law, aka whatever can go wrong will go wrong. This is a fantastic trope and can be used to put your characters into bad situations over and over and over and over again, because it's no fun if the heroes win all the time. I've definitely read some stories where they were up against some pretty high stakes, but nothing ever went wrong, and that can get really boring. So it's really important to put obstacles in your character's way, and if there's a chance that something can go wrong, let it happen and then see what arises out of that in your story. You can overdo this and it just goes down the angst train, but it is pretty fun to throw these obstacles in and have that Murphy's Law where things just keep going wrong, just keep going wrong, just keep going wrong, and your characters eventually learn to get themselves out of it. Another narrative tool that is very helpful is pinning down your character arc, because you might know how your story starts and how it ends, and maybe even what's going on in the middle. But if you're not sure where you want your characters to go and how they can grow, then your story might feel a bit static in that the characters are just serving the purpose of the plot and not really feeling real in of themselves. And this is where character arcs come into play. Now you can have flat character arcs, and that is where the story is revolving around the character. But to really drive your story along, you can quickly borrow from established character arcs as you are writing your story and apply them to your characters so that you know they're going to start in one place, grow, and end up somewhere different. Here are some common character arcs. Two opposing but related ones are the examples of corruption and redemption. The character of Anakin Skywalker actually is a great example of both of these in one, because you have Anakin, he starts, becomes a hero, and falls to the dark side. And then at the end of his journey, he is redeemed. And that's a great one that you can throw onto your characters. You can have a character start a certain place and say, with all these things that are going to happen to them in the story, it's going to change them either for the worse or for the better. Other character arcs can include things like healing from trauma, or learning to forgive, or learning to overcome selfishness or any other kind of negative trait. It's important to have an idea of where your characters start and where they end, so that not just the story moves, but the internal progression of the character moves as well. And by borrowing from some of these, you can greatly enrich your story. Another fantastic element that we can use in our narrative toolbox is tropes. I really love tropes because they're quick little things that you can pull, as the dictionary says, a recurring theme or motif that come up over and over and over again in stories. They can be small and they can be large. For example, the trope of a princess being rescued from a dragon by a great hero, or the trope that is very common in anime and kind of extending out into other media at this point, of a character gets hit and immediately blood out the mouth. And it's become almost a running joke at this point, because usually if you get hit so hard that blood is coming out of your mouth, you have internal injuries and you are definitely not going to survive. But as we all know, these characters survive a lot. So it's kind of funny. It's like anytime anybody gets hit, immediately blood comes out of their mouth. And that's a little trope that you can pull at this point more for a funny gag than anything else. Each genre of writing usually includes a few standard tropes that readers have come to expect from that particular genre. And the way you include these tropes and twist them and put your own unique spin on them is what's going to take them from feeling maybe tired or worn out to something fresh and new and exciting. Let's look at two common tropes that pop up quite a lot and how they are used to drive stories along. First, we have the MacGuffin. A MacGuffin is usually an object of some sort that is being sought after by different characters to complete a quest. Now, often the object is not very much important. It's really about the journey the characters are going on. So, for example, in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, we have the Halloween heists that come around every year. They're so much fun to watch, and the enjoyment doesn't come from us watching the characters get the item that is going to proclaim them the best detective in the world, but it is the hijinks the characters get up to along the way in trying to stop each other from that happening. Another fantastic example of a MacGuffin comes from the MCU. We see this most exemplified in the Guardians of the Galaxy film, where all the characters are after the Power Stone. And we literally see scenes where characters are running and fighting each other to get this one item that, if they don't prevent the bad guy from getting it, is going to mean the destruction of certain worlds and certain characters. And indeed, we do see that it has been used for evil throughout the film until the characters are able to finally stop the bad guy. And actually, the entire MCU is really just a gigantic fetch quest where these characters are desperately trying to get their hands on all the Infinity Stones, the MacGuffins of the universe, before Thanos can get his hands on them. And along the way, we learn about the characters and their hopes and their dreams, their aspirations, their goals. It's a really great example of a MacGuffin because the MacGuffins themselves are intrinsic to the plot, because if the good guys don't get their hands on them, things are going to fall apart so badly that it's the end of the MCU as we know it. Ultimately, either treatment, whether the MacGuffins are irrelevant or whether they're actually useful and integral to the plot, will work so long as it gives your characters some reason to progress on their story going forward. Another fantastic trope we can use is the Deus Ex Machina. Now, this one has been quite abused, but can still work very, very well if set up ahead of time, because Deus Ex Machina literally means the machine of the gods. So in Greek drama, at the end of a play, when something wasn't going right, the gods would literally descend, and it would be actual actors in a chariot coming down from the top of the stage, and they would save the day. Now, these days, we tend to like Deus Ex Machinas where the characters did something earlier on that is going to set up that Deus Ex Machina and make it make sense from a character-driven standpoint instead of something external that the characters have no control over. So, for example, I really, really enjoy the Deus Ex Machina in the play Tartuffe by Molière. It is so funny, the whole play. It's a great comedy. And we have this reveal at the end where when the family who has been taken advantage of by a con man is at their wits' end and everything is going to go so badly for them and they're going to be disgraced, ruined, shamed in the public eye, the King of France himself comes along and saves the day. And the plot twist behind why the King of France comes and saves the day is so cleverly executed that it actually forces us to go back and revisit the play with fresh eyes, which makes watching it again from the beginning a whole new experience, because you'll notice, oh wait, that character did this, and that character did this, which set this emotion, which set this emotion, which makes the Deus Ex Machina moment actually feel very earned instead of just completely out of nowhere, or because the characters had no other recourse and the writer wrote themselves into a corner. There are hundreds more such big tropes and thousands more little ones. So if you are stuck in your story and you need some way to frame it or some device to spark something in your story, pull from these tropes and see what kind of things you can add to it to make them unique while getting your story moving. A second great tool to have in your writer toolbox is a detailed understanding of structure and format. To carry our analogy about baking cookies a little bit further, if the previous things with the tropes and all that are the ingredients, then structure is your mold. It's your baking pan. It's what's going to hold the whole story together while you are crafting it. If you find that you're getting stuck in your writing, it might be because you don't have an outline in which to fit everything. Most stories can be boiled down to 2 or 3 basic plots. And although there are endless variations of these 2 or 3 basic plots, if you have a good narrative structure that you are framing these stories with, then as you're writing, you can pull from these things and put every little piece of your story into its assigned place. It is important to remember that structures are not a one-size-fits-all. Another reason you may be having trouble with your story is that you are trying to force your story to go along with a structure that is not serving it well. If you're writing a film, you may not want to be using TV structure. If you're writing a short story, the hero's journey may not be appropriate for your story. So as you're writing, consider something else to frame your story within if you are running into issues. Now, with that said, let us explore some common structures. Here are 5 common story structures that you should be able to frame whatever you're writing within. If one of these doesn't work for you, as I mentioned, throw it out and pick another one. But these ones should work to get your story moving. The first of these structures is the 3-act structure. This is most commonly used in film and consists of 3 basic parts, which is the setup, the build-up, and the payoff. It was popularized in the late 1970s and has gained success and a great foothold in the film industry ever since. Not every film has to follow this structure, but a great many of the very popular and very successful blockbuster films do. You can apply this to novels as well, so if you think this will fit your story best, go ahead and give this one a try. The next one we can look at is the 5-act structure. This one is most commonly used in plays and television. Plays because you need to have breaks in between the different scenes for actors to change costumes and set pieces, and you would put the curtain down and let all that happen in between. It's persisted into television quite well because the 5-act structure leaves time for your different commercial breaks. It essentially follows the same beats as your 3-act structure, but takes a little bit longer and has different lengths in which it establishes the setup, the build-up, and then ultimately the payoff. The next one we have is my personal favorite, which is the hero's journey. There's also the heroine's journey, which has slightly more steps and is tailored specifically to work from a woman's perspective, but the hero's journey is kind of this all-encompassing name for both of those. It was based on the work of psychiatrist Carl Jung and popularized by Joseph Campbell. Famously, Star Wars uses it, as well as The Lion King and many other epic novels. It works really well for long format storytelling and episodic series that spin out over a long time, because you have your hero in your ordinary world, they have to leave, go on this great journey, all these different trials happen to them along the way, we go into these dark points, the point of no return, and then we slowly come back again, and it's just this circle that just goes round and round and round, and you can repeat it as many times as you need to before the hero finally gets to the end. The next one is fairy tale structure. This is probably one of the oldest structures that you have learned and tends to follow the format of once upon a time, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, until finally we reach happily ever after. Along the way, the character usually is going to run into some kind of trouble, either because of their own naivety or because of some warning that they deliberately broke or ignored when they were told specifically not to do something. Many times, the character also learns some kind of life lesson, for example, in the case of King Thrushbeard, where a spoiled princess learns about humility. Or even in the case of Cinderella, we learn that being good and kind is going to help you out of a bad situation, and being mean and horrible will end up with you dancing on cut-off feet forever. Another structure that we can use is the non-linear structure. Now, that is when you, instead of taking a story from the beginning and taking it to the end, you're going to put something from the end right here, and something from the beginning here, and something from the middle here. The purpose of doing this is to connect things by theme. You can also connect things with imagery, as is the case in Cloud Atlas, because you're trying to give the viewer, give the reader an impression of something very important. You're trying to express an idea to them, which you are telling through this story, and it's not necessarily going to work for the story if we start at the beginning. The beginning might make more sense if we start in the middle, and then we jump to the end, and then we go back to the beginning. So non-linear structure can be a great way to tell that. It's also a great way to organize something such as a poetry collection. That can be fiction, it can be non-fiction, but organizing something by theme can help the reader understand how these poems are connected, rather than writing them in either chronological order of when they were written, or ordering them chronologically as how they go together if it's a story. So focusing more on theme and imagery can be a great way to make the best of non-linear story format. The last structure that I would like to touch on is vignettes. Vignettes are usually a series of short, interconnected stories, usually told linearly, but can definitely be told in a non-linear fashion, connecting them to what we just talked about, revolving around events and characters that aren't really big enough to stand on their own, but are really interesting as small little snippets. So usually they can be like a drabble, 100 words, or range up to 1,000 words. We often find these in short story collections or in films where you have several different little stories all happening under, again, an overarching theme, or even very popularly in the realm of fan fiction where the overall world has been given to us already, so we don't need to take time setting up who the characters are and setting up the world building. The readers are going to go into it with this already in mind, so all you have to do is focus on events that may or may not have happened within or slightly outside of the canon, and it just gives the world a bit of a fresh perspective and just kind of widens it up a bit. Other examples of vignettes occur within the slice of life genres, such as the very cute Japanese manga A Man and His Cat, or the ever popular American sitcom format. As you are drafting, especially on your first draft, do not worry if your story doesn't seem to neatly fit into any of these structures. Of course, it's helpful to have these to pull from, but when editing, you can always beat your story into submission then, and there are other structures out there that you can pull from. These are just 5 of the most common ones that you will see used over and over again and are a great jumping off point. Now, another aspect of storytelling that is almost as important as structure is format, which is how we put the story together. I've alluded to this a little bit in parts 1 and 2, but we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into it right now. For example, if you have a story that is laid out in mostly dialogue with sparse descriptions of setting and the world and other character descriptions, then what you have on your hands is a script that may be used for film and television. And that is going to be written a certain way, which is very different from how you would write a novel or how you would write a short story. And it may fall into these structures that we talked about, but how it's laid out on the page is very creative and very different. Storyboarding is another organizational technique. It's mostly used by film or comic book people, but it can be very useful for organizing your story. Some people use sticky notes, but by drawing out your story and kind of placing it in an order, you can move these sections around and realize, aha, this section that I thought made sense here, doesn't work there. But if I move it over to here, oh, now everything's falling into place. So it's a great way to tactilely organize your story. You're not just writing it down, but you're moving things around physically, which can really help spark creativity in your brain. In a similar vein, editing film is a wonderful way to tell a story. Sometimes all you have to do to tell a story is take different sections of film and edit them together. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on a small little project, and when the raw footage has been shown to someone, they're like, I don't know how this is going to go together. And then when everything is edited nicely, all of a sudden it makes sense. If you want to go onto a deep dive of how editing is so incredibly useful in storytelling, I highly, highly recommend How Star Wars Was Saved in the Edit, because believe me, it was a mess, and editing completely transformed the film. Another great format you can use to tell your story is that of radio. Although this story format declined in popularity with the rise of television, it's actually been making kind of a comeback lately in the form of podcasting, things like Welcome to Night Vale or SCP Explained. It's useful to go back and listen to wonderful old shows like The Lone Ranger, because you can really see how the people back then utilized sound effects and great voice acting to tell stories where you didn't even have any visual accompaniment. In fact, in 1938, a radio broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds was so realistically portrayed that the people listening actually thought they were under attack from an alien invasion. So definitely consider that format, whether you're actually creating a radio show or getting more into the podcasting space when you are telling your stories. It's a great avenue to explore and can be really freeing instead of trying to write something down on paper and producing an epic novel. If we go back to the idea of theme, that's going to be very helpful when you're writing nonfiction, such as a memoir, because a lot of times the things in the memoir have already happened. You don't need to write them, but you do need to organize them. And if you have a particular theme, say for example, you're healing from trauma, or you're talking about how to parent, or overcoming challenges in the workplace, by organizing things that have happened in your life into a theme that you can explore, you're going to have a much more tightly centered narrative. So you've got to leave some stuff behind. You can't tell everything in your life, but by decluttering your story, it's going to be that much more compelling. When you're first drafting your story and you're trying to format and organize your ideas, you can use anything you need to get your stories out. You can write beautiful flowing prose if that's your thing. You can write bulleted lists. Applications like Siri or Google Docs actually let you dictate into them and have speech-to-text options, so you can just blurt out your ideas and they are there on the page. You might record yourself and then edit your film later, or you might do little sketches on a notepad that you have just to get those ideas out. Anything that gets your ideas out of your head and onto paper or onto some kind of medium that is going to store your idea is valid. Now, it's all well and good of me to give you all this information about narrative tools and structure and organization, but you're probably thinking, I still don't know where to acquire this information. That is where research comes into play. And don't worry, I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do to get started in your research journey and how to acquire these tools to begin writing in the first place. The number one thing, and this is a hill I will die on, that a writer needs to do if they want to become a better author is to read. I'll say it again. If you want to become a good, an excellent, a fantastic, the best writer in the world, you must read. Now, I don't care what you read, but you've got to read. Because if you think about drawing, an artist has to copy other artists when they're first learning so that they can learn how to draw. A musician must listen to music. A dancer must go to dance classes and be taught by their teachers by watching what they are doing. You don't just acquire this knowledge on your own, you have to seek it out, and the best way to become a good author is to read deeply. This advice also applies to if you want to become a great director or a great screenwriter or a great playwright. You've got to study your chosen medium. Now, cross-disciplinary study is going to be the most helpful, of course, because authors don't need to just study books. I've given lots of examples from film and television and radio because all those mediums are different forms of storytelling, but specifically honing in on what medium that you are trying to express yourself in is going to be the best way that you can get better at that particular medium. And yes, listening to audiobooks counts as reading. If writers have access to nothing else, you can read. And by reading, you can start to imitate what you like and throw out what you don't like. And over time, by practicing and reading and practicing and reading, you are going to be able to have a wonderful knowledge of story structure, of grammar, of everything that we've talked about that makes a story good, because you inherently are going to understand when you're reading a story that you like what's good about it and what's not if you've read hundreds and hundreds of such stories. It's so important that you read anything you possibly can, that you read fiction for all the things I've talked about, that you read nonfiction, because sometimes real life is way more interesting than anything you would read in a story. And you can draw from real life to create your stories. Think about Shakespeare. His Macbeth was based on the recent events of his history, but Julius Caesar was based on the events of the far past. Both very successful, very well put together plays. Think about George R.R. Martin with the Song of Ice and Fire series. He based a lot of his politics on the English War of the Roses. And think about Lin-Manuel Miranda and his critically acclaimed musical Hamilton. What was that based on? The events of the American Revolution. So by pulling from history and nonfiction, you can actually create something that is so amazing and so unique and fresh and vibrant. So don't be afraid to check out nonfiction as well. And that's going to be really helpful when you're trying to write something and you need knowledge of it, such as medical knowledge, learning how to do fighting scenes and romance and things like that. And nonfiction and studying these things is going to give you a breadth of knowledge that you can just infuse right into your storytelling and make it that much better. As well as nonfiction, you want to read genres that you haven't tried before. If you read mostly fiction and you read epic fiction, maybe try epic poetry. Read articles, read the backs of cereal boxes, read traditionally published authors, read independent authors, read books you like and books you don't like, or at least flip through them to see what kind of things that you think you would like to write and what kind of things that you want to stay well away from. But the next thing that you are going to want to do on your journey is study. Because as I mentioned before, you can learn a ton of things by reading, but why reinvent the wheel? A lot of people have already gone through and analyzed, as I presented in our idea about the 5-act structure, all these things that are common to stories and make them interesting and make them work. So instead of spending a lot of time trying to figure this out on your own, you can start noticing these things by being already aware of them by studying. If you truly want to master the art of storytelling, it is vital to move past just simply passively absorbing knowledge and into actively picking apart a story to learn its inner workings. Why does a good story work? How do I replicate it? What are the grammar rules and other functions of communication that are going to create a good story, something that was in my mind and now I'm imparting to you? These are all questions that aspiring writers should be asking themselves, and by studying the craft, you are going to learn these things. There are 2 caveats that I want to briefly discuss here. Number 1, you do not need to follow every piece of writing advice out there. Just Pick what works for you and throw out the rest. As Bruce Lee once said, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is essentially your own. Number 2, you never want to stop studying, because here's the thing, you might gain mastery of a particular style of storytelling, but there's so many different ways to tell a story that if you lock yourself into a box and say there is only one true way to tell a story, then you are limiting yourself. By opening yourselves up to different formats of storytelling, then you are going to learn much more and recognize that you are always going to be learning. There's always a new way to tell a story, and you can always improve and get better. Because I don't know if anyone's ever truly 100% a master. If you ask the great masters of storytelling, they too will tell you that they are always learning something new every day. Now, there are many resources, both free and that you can pay for, that can be accessed when you are looking for tools and resources to get you started on your storytelling journey. Starting with the free resources, go to the library. You can get many books on writing through the library, and if you're not sure what to look for, ask a librarian and they will help you out. You can also go online. YouTube, right here, AuthorTube, BookTube are great resources where you will find a vibrant community of both authors and readers offering advice about how to write, as well as things that work in books and things that don't work in books, or that they personally find do and don't work, because everybody's taste is subjective. By looking into this community here on YouTube, you will find a wealth of information that you can come back to over and over again. Go on Google and type in, how do I insert writing related question here. There are going to be so many articles that pop up with the answer to your question. And I would recommend, don't just stop at one article, read a few, because by getting a conglomerate of information, you'll be able to see what the general trend of advice is, and then be able to take that on for your own personal benefit. If you want to go a little bit further, you can purchase writing books instead of just getting them from the library. That way you will always have them at home, and you can purchase physical books, which I recommend because you can take notes in them and make all your annotations and highlight and bookmark and stuff, where, I mean, you can do that in Kindle books too, but Kindle books technically aren't your books, they're just licensed to you. So when you're getting ebooks, I would recommend that you maybe get something that's like a PDF or something else. But physically writing in your books is going to go a long way to helping you to retain the information. So physical books I do recommend over digital books when you are getting books on craft or any book to study. I also recommend that you go to writing workshops, which again can be hosted for free at libraries or schools. But you can go to schools and institutions and pay for these things. Now, there is a free way to get education at schools, which is often by auditing classes. Some colleges do want you to pay a small fee to audit, and you would have to find out what's offered in your area. There are both online and physical classes that you can audit or even take for credit when you are learning how to write. But it's going to really get you in a space where you're interacting with, number one, writing professionals who know what they're doing, and number two, other people like you who are just starting, and that can create a wonderful environment in which to hone your craft. So we come to my short list of resources that I have put together, which is a jumping off point for you. First up on the list, we've got some YouTube stuff here. These are a collection of different authors and channels that focus on both writing advice and general knowledge advice and general love of books that are going to put you in the right direction as you're starting your writing journey. The way the YouTube algorithm works, as you watch one video, you're going to get recommended another video and another video, and you can spend all day just really enhancing your knowledge. And a lot of these you don't actually have to watch, so you can listen to them like a podcast. Put them on while you're doing something around the house, or get out your notebook and start writing. Put them on while you're in the car. It's a great way to just really enhance your knowledge for free. Next, we have the books. These are a collection of books that are partly about how to write, partly about the grammar and nitty-gritty of the English language, partly about literary analysis, and partly about structure and format and organization. And if you look in the back of any type of nonfiction book that has been compiled from a wealth of knowledge, you will often find more books listed in the back that you can use to continue your research. So I would definitely recommend that you check them out and add them to your list, whether you're going to buy them from Amazon or another book retailer, or whether you're going to get them from the library or somebody else that you know that has these books on hand. The last resource that I want to point you to is this list of websites that is going to be extremely helpful to you, mainly because a lot of these authors have email lists that you can sign up for and get writing advice delivered straight to your email inbox, either daily or once a week, depending on how you choose to manage your email subscriptions. And what's really cool is not only you're going to get fresh new writing advice on the publishing industry and what's going on with books and trends and all that kind of good stuff, but you can also trawl back through these websites using the search function and find articles upon articles of anything you can possibly think of related to writing that it's going to help you out so much. Now that we have gone through our list of resources and talked about tools and structure and format and all these different things that you can do to really understand how to tell a story, the last thing you must do is practice. Because it's all well and good to read all this stuff and internalize it, but if you don't actually try it, you're never going to get better. It's just like learning how to play music or learning how to dance or doing art, all these things I talked about in the beginning. If you don't actually try it, you're not going to improve. You might have some inborn talent, and there are definitely people who just kind of naturally just do something and it comes to them, but you need to hone and cultivate and nurture talent. And if you don't have that talent, practicing will give you something to work with, okay? You can not be very good at something, but if you practice it, you can get good. And if you can get good, you can get better. And if you can get better, you can get excellent. There's no such thing as remaining at mediocre. You can always, with enough time and dedication and hard work, go from 0 to 100. Now, regular repetition is generally the best way to go about practicing. Some people swear by writing every single day. Some people find that that gives them creative burnout, and so it's better for them to write every couple days, once a week. Some people will do once a month. Some people go long stretches without writing at all. That's not super recommended, although it does happen, and there are some people who are very great authors that can do that. Most of the time, if you're going to set yourself a habit and do something every few days, every day, that is when you are going to see the most improvement in the shortest amount of time. As you're practicing, you can use pretty much anything to get better. You can write on a computer, you can type on a typewriter, you can use the dictation software, whether it's something you've bought or you're using free options like Siri and Google Docs that I mentioned before. You can write things out longhand. Anything that you're doing to actually get your ideas out of your head and onto paper, as long as you're doing it consistently, is going to improve your writing. And whatever your writing schedule looks like, you can keep things fresh and exciting for yourself by switching up what you're doing. So if you're writing every day but you're finding it's getting boring, if you're an author of epic fantasy, start writing poetry. If you're a world-renowned, award-winning journalist, try your hand at comedy. If you write film, maybe kind of mosey over into theater and see if that fits you a little bit better. And by kind of breaking out of this mold, you're going to keep things fresh and make it exciting to come back and practice writing every day. A few closing thoughts as I finally wrap up this series here. Number 1, sad or ambiguous endings are okay. Not everything has to have a happy ending. You might want to leave some things to the reader's imagination, and that's totally okay. Sometimes an idea is best left bite-sized. Sometimes a story gets too bloated, and you're thinking, well, every story needs to be this epic novel or this 22-episode TV series, and no, something can be 6 episodes and be good. Something can be a 90-minute movie and be amazing. If you think about The Telltale Heart, it's one of my favorite American Gothic stories, it clocks in just a little over 2,000 words. It's by Edgar Allan Poe, and it is absolutely fantastic. If it was any longer, it wouldn't have the impact it has. But that story, once you read it, it sticks with you. And many of Poe's other stories are like that as well. They're short, not sweet. I don't think we can use that to describe them, but they're definitely haunting. and compelling. Lastly, don't be afraid to write bad ideas. They can be ideas that other people think are bad. They can be ideas that you know are garbage. But you know what? As long as it gets your first draft from beginning to end, and you have something that you can hold up and say, look, I wrote this, then feel accomplished with what you've gotten. If what you want to write is a self-insert Mary Sue character who defeats the powers of darkness using a mystical unicorn and who can do no wrong, go for it. It's your story. No one can tell you what you can and can't write. If you think that idea is a hot mess, you can change it. No one's saying you can't do that either. But don't be afraid to write it down. Sometimes you have the most fun when you are throwing the most crazy stories at the wall and seeing what sticks. If you've just started writing, be gentle with yourself. Don't worry about being good. Just have fun. You might not be the most award-winning author out there. You might not have a film that makes billions of dollars. But if you enjoyed it, and if somebody else got enjoyment out of it, that's the most important thing. Well, that concludes part 3. It's been a journey, and I'm so happy that you have come along with me as we have discovered how to write a story from beginning to end if you get stuck or if you don't even know how to get started. So part 1 was going over how to get started. Part 2 was kind of finishing everything up and looking at all those things in the middle that we can use to keep going. And then part 3 is looking at the narrative tools and framing and structure that we have at our disposal to be able to tie everything together into a coherent story. So now that you know all that, what's stopping you from writing? Go forth and write.